I've said it before and I've said it again. While everybody loves the Attitude Era between, let's say, 1998 and 2001, and understandably so, if for my money, my favorite year during that time frame actually was 1997. To me, that was one of the most important and significant years in the history of the company. And you could look at 1997 and you can see that while the WWF wasn't all the way there, and the WWF was in a lot of trouble, they were in a bad way. Make no mistake about it. 97 arguably was maybe the worst year of the company's history over the past 30 years. It was bad. They were in a bad way financially. They were getting their asses kicked 6 ways from Sunday by WCW in the ratings, and everything was going against the WWF. But you could start to see as 1997 progressed, things were starting to change. You had new faces. You had a new feeling to the product. And even though they weren't officially in the Attitude Era, so to speak, you could start to see where the WWF was starting to catch up with the times and starting to mirror and match the kind of crash TV elements that were being popularized by Jerry Springer and the television of that time, the television that I grew up with as a teenager in the mid to late 90s. And you could see when you go back and watch this year of the WWF in 1997, you could see a lot of things starting to really come into place. You see guys starting to find their footing and their traction. You see the transition away from the hokey, childish characters to more reality based and more adult themed characters. You see young and new faces starting to emerge on the scenes. You see big time opponents in big time matches. To me, I'm sorry, I'll take 1997 over anything from 98 to 2001 because of its historical meaning, its significance, and how much it laid the foundation for everything that was to come in the future. I love WWF 1997. And everything that 1996 wasn't, in particular SummerSlam 1996 wasn't, 1997, and in particular, this show, SummerSlam 1997, was. Where 96 had a lot of forgettable matches, and the big matches maybe weren't that great, or they flat out disappointed you or frustrated you, like the main event did of that show. Just about every single match on this card had a great feeling to it, a great flow to it, a great purpose to it, characters that were well developed, storylines that were well developed. This was a kick-ass show. This is a kick-ass SummerSlam. I don't know if I would go so far as to say one of the 5 best SummerSlams of all time, but I might struggle off of the top of my head to name 5 better. This was a really damn good show. I mean, from Jump Street, you're starting off with Mankind versus Triple H in a steel cage match. That's your opening salvo. That's your curtain jerker. Is fucking Mankind versus Triple H in a steel cage match. Outstanding stuff. And these guys weren't even sniffing the main event at this point in time. Sure, Mankind had sniffed it just a tad in a short-term program with Michaels in 96, but you get what I'm saying. These were 2 guys that were still trying to work their way up the ladder. And these are the type of matches you love to go back and see, especially when you see how these guys' careers turned out, because you go to these moments in these matches and these events and you say, this is when this happened, and this is what led to this, and this is what led to that, and this is outstanding. I love this steel cage match between Mankind and Hunter Hearst Helmsley at the time. Hunter Hearst Helmsley in a steel cage. Hunter Hearst Helmsley escorted by China. Hunter Hearst Helmsley in Degeneration X. Hunter Hearst Helmsley takes a huge dump. Hunter Hearst Helmsley loves to bang Channy in the back door. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. God damn it, it's Triple H. It took him too long to figure that out. But, the incorporation of China, which again was something very unique, very different. You had the Degeneration X group at the time. Again, something unique to the WWF at least, even though some would say it was a ripoff in some ways of the NWO, even though I would say that Degeneration X was a little bit different, a little more childish in their antics, a little more frat boyish, where the NWO was more like hardcore thuggin' and buggin' street gang, if you will. But they both worked for their companies at that time, and Mankind, Triple H, this stuff was outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. I could say it's one of my 10 favorite SummerSlam matches of all time. Then you get Goldust versus Brian Pillman. This is a interesting match. If Pillman loses, he's got to wear Marlena's dress until he wins a freaking match. This was Goldust at a time where Goldust was, breaking all types of boundaries and doing all types of weird, freaky fucking shit. And it worked. It fit the times perfectly. And Goldust fit the times so splendidly. And Brian Pillman, honestly, is one of those characters and performers that could fit in any time and in any era. And when you look at it, Mankind, Triple H, had a lot of story going into it. It worked. Goldust, Brian Pillman had story going into it, and it worked. A great way to start off the show. Then you've got the Legion of Doom versus the Godwins in a tag match. And hey, to me, this tag match, frankly, was probably better than the tag title match 4-way at 96. Then you get to British Bulldog versus Ken Shamrock for the European Championship. He brought in Shamrock at WrestleMania 13 to be the guest referee for Austin versus Hart. And now you're starting Ken Shamrock on his push at a time where he was something different to the company. Here's a guy transitioning over from MMA, which at that time was a big-time risque no-no in mainstream society. John McCain once referred to it as human cockfighting. There were national movements to try and get MMA banned. Banned, mind you. Think about that when you look at where UFC today, which is a testament to Zuffa and Dana White and everybody involved for what they've created there. But back in 1997, having Ken Shamrock there, he brought something different to the table. He was new, he was fresh, and he was an exciting character. What I liked about him was he was a guy you could like, but he was over the fucking edge, and you believed it because you actually thought Ken Shamrock was over the fucking edge, and he was awesome. And obviously the British Bulldog was the British Bulldog, and I always liked British Bulldog as a heel. I thought he was pretty good as a heel. The whole arm wrestling match they had in the lead up to this, where he freaking headbutts him and pours dog food on him. I'm like, this is outstanding. This is the type of shit that if we got this in 2014, I don't know if you need to do dog food or not, but the point being is if we did these little type of things, imagine how much more we would care about these matches that don't involve titles, that are just on the undercard or on the midcard, and there's no excuse for not being able to have them. Think about how much more exciting a British Bulldog versus Ken Shamrock match was for the third-tier title, the European Championship, than almost anything you might get on SummerSlam 2014. Just think about that for a second. And that was for the third-tier title. Then you had the 8-man tag, and that was what it was. The Bariquas versus DOA. Excuse me. Was what it was. No real thoughts on that. But then you get to the two feature matches on this show, which are both incredibly important and significant for their own reasons. First, you get to the Intercontinental Championship match between Steve Austin and Owen Hart, who was the champ at the time. And, this was a Steve Austin that was starting to really get some legs. This was a Steve Austin that was really starting to catch fire with the crowds. This was a Steve Austin that you knew at some point in time it was going to be his time. He was going to get that opportunity. He was going to become the man, for better or for worse, for the WWF. There was no denying it. It was not a matter of if. It was a matter of when and how soon that when was actually going to occur. Austin was the one thing at the time that WCW just didn't have. Austin was the one thing that WCW just couldn't match. And if you could start to put some of the other pieces in place around a Stone Cold Steve Austin, you knew eventually you could break through and you could start to do something special, which is eventually what the WWF did in 1998. Austin was really starting to catch fire here. Of course, you've got Owen Hart. What more can you say about Owen Hart? But the thing is that this Intercontinental Championship match almost went down as one of the biggest disasters in the history of the company. As you're going through the match, Owen Hart, of course, tries to pile drive Austin, and they don't get the positioning right, and basically Owen Hart breaks Austin's neck. And when you go back and watch this, you're like, man, this was a good match, and then that injury happened, and this match went to shit. And then the whole hokey finish where Austin, gets up on Owen Hart, and Owen does the best job he can to not make it look like total shit that Austin's about to pin him and win the IC title. You sit there and you look at that and say, my God, that's disappointing. My God, this is terrible. And you can only imagine at the time when Vince McMahon and the others are doing commentary there, that they're sitting there and they're saying to themselves, oh my God, what's happening? Oh my God. This all could be coming to an end. Oh my God. I can't imagine the panic in the gorilla position. I can't imagine the panic at the commentary table, because they knew at some point in time that this guy was going to be the breadwinner, that this guy was going to be the bell cow, that Austin was going to be the franchise player for the WWF throughout the rest of the 90s and into the 2000s. And now you see it here, and it could all be coming to an end. And all the months of future creative that you maybe had planned could potentially be wiped out. And where the hell were you going to be as a company? What the funny thing is sometimes in tragedy, you see perseverance. Sometimes in these great moments of trials and tribulations, you see something special happen. And I will always assert and argue that this match was as important to Stone Cold Steve Austin in the WWF as any match that he was ever involved in before or after this. And the reason I said that is because for so long, Stone Cold Steve Austin was going around talking about himself being the toughest SOB on the planet. He was proclaiming himself the toughest SOB on the planet. He was sitting there and saying that nobody was tougher than him. And now you get here, SummerSlam 1997, and the people can see that he's hurt legitimately. The crowd's not stupid. The company might want to think that, but the crowd's not stupid. They know something's up. They know something's went wrong. They know this guy's hurting. He's hurt in a bad way. And yet he still finds a way to win the fucking match. I will take what happened here, even though I'm sure Austin wouldn't, and understandably so. I will take what happened here and what it led to and what it resulted to over any 5-star wrestling classic of fucking imaginable, because this is what truly cemented Stone Cold Steve Austin as the franchise player for the WWF. With this injury, they were able to do some different things. They were start to go into Austin and McMahon throughout the rest of 97. I say in some ways, as sad as it might sound to say, that this injury at this match at this time was the best thing that could have ever happened for Stone Cold Steve Austin and the WWF. And thankfully, even though I know Austin had a lot of animus and, bitterness and heat towards Owen Hart because he felt like Owen Hart didn't apologize to him appropriately, didn't take responsibility for it. It's always a good thing to see that Austin was able to be the bigger man when it was called for after the untimely, unfortunate, tragic passing of Owen Hart, and was able to, toast to him and everything else. And, obviously speaks very highly of him to this day. But this match here again, it was the right player, it was the right opponent, it was the right place, it was the right time, and the right bad thing that turned into one of the best things that could have ever happened to the WWF. This, to me, nobody ever talks about it being one of the truly great SummerSlam matches of all time. I will say again that this is arguably one of the most, if not the most important SummerSlam matches in the history of the fucking event, in the history of the damn company, because it cemented Austin as the man. And then we get to the main event. And what a really, really good main event this was, as you would expect out of Bret Hart, who I've called before arguably Mr. SummerSlam, versus The Undertaker for the WWF Championship. Of course, you've got Shawn Michaels there, and I can't even remember this time when he lost his smile, his knee injury, what the fuck he was doing there, but he was a special guest referee. And I even sit there and say this whole time. You knew Bret was going to leave. You knew come November he was gone. You already knew it at this point in time. So why the fuck you put him in here in this title match and put the damn belt on him and then let him carry it to Survivor Series 1997, to me only implies, and I'll talk about that in the Survivor Series review series. But again, this worked. This worked really well. This match was outstanding between Bret Hart and The Undertaker. This was the launching pad for Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels throughout the rest of 97, and we know what ended up happening there. Great things for the WWF, not so much Bret Hart. A great main event, three of the top guys, arguably the three top guys in the company at that time. So these were the guys that were a part of that new generation era. These were the guys that were kind of holding the fort until the Mankind's, until the Triple H's, until the Austins were ready to really take over and really take this company to the next level. And I think in some ways that adds to the appeal to this match. This match here, SummerSlam 97, the main event to me was everything that the main event of SummerSlam 96 was not. Again, if you want to understand the history of the company, you want to understand how the Attitude Era came to be, and you want to see how things start to piece together, and you're a fan of that type of stuff, then SummerSlam 97 is a show you must go back and watch, because to me, it's one of the most important SummerSlams, if not the most important SummerSlams in the history of the company, and flat out to me is one of my favorite, and if not one of the very best SummerSlams in the history of the company.